So the debate over Arizona's immigration law rages on. This week, the Department of Justice finally announced that they would challenge the legality of this piece of legislation after months of making critical statements. But knowing how the justice system works in this country, that just means that the battle is a long ways away from being over. But as much debate as there is over the problem of legal immigration, when it comes to this simple law, even lawyers can't agree on whether it's just or not. So I brought two lawyers in. Joining me here in the studio is Jordan Sekulow from the American Center for Law and Justice. And from our New York studio, I have Michael Wilds, immigration attorney and former federal prosecutor. Gentlemen, thanks both for being here. Jordan, I'll start with you since you're here in the studio. Do you think that the federal government should be challenging this absurd law?
No, I think the federal government's wasting a lot of money here because this law is actually a mirror of federal law. And it's confusing the issue. It's not an immigration law. It's a securing the borders law. It's not about naturalization. That is definitely under the federal government's purview. This is about people who have already broken a law in the United States, and the state police officers, law enforcement saying we're going to do something about it because the federal government has admitted we can't. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, has said we can't handle this many people. The Department of Justice even said in their lawsuit one of the problems with the law, they thought, was that it would be too many people in court because there's too many illegal aliens. And the second part that's interesting is nothing about race in the lawsuit, completely left out. So President Obama, when he talked about all that rhetoric, that this was a racial profiling or would lead because of your skin color, the way you talk, it's not in the suit because it's not true.
We will definitely get into the racial profiling part of it. Michael, very quickly, I've heard a lot of people say that this Arizona law is an extension of federal law, but I thought it was, not constitutional.
This law is clearly outside of the ambit of any state to decide. The sovereign borders from the days of pirates to the days of terrorists have always been under the ambit of the federal government. We are the United States. Arizona has no right to make its own interpretation of immigration law or judge whether or not the government is doing an adequate job. Listen, we are in both attorneys here are in agreement. There are only 7,000 ICE agents, about 238 immigration judge, 1 million visitors to America through 342 ports a day. This is a huge job, and the immigration authorities can't do it by themselves with the resources that they have. Clearly, the immigration system is broken. Arizona has no right, just the same, to take the law into its own hands. And if our Washington leaders are definitely silent on this issue, it's important for them to get their act together. What law are they taking into their own hands? This litigation is a huge waste of resource and time, unfortunately, for the federal government and the state government to go through. I'd be happy to debate it, sir. Let me just say my word if I can. And I have to tell you, realistically, as a former federal prosecutor, as a former mayor, I was a mayor in New Jersey, I well understand the burden that unlawful documented individuals place here. But I have a 52-year history with my father in Midtown Manhattan. He represented John Lennon years ago of immigration. This is great. And I see the contribution that this community makes.
Point out one area in this law.
We do not have enough handcuffs or airplanes to remove these individuals from this country.
Because no one has specifically named a portion of this law, including in the federal government's lawsuit and the 6 other lawsuits that have been filed, that specifically conflicts with federal law and the preemption doctrine of the United States.
Okay, I'll give you an example. I'll answer your question.
No. In the law,
I don't want an example.
Areas. I want
the premise of people. Let me talk, sir. I can't talk over you. The premise of people who disagree with my position is that what Arizona is doing is enforcing law consistent with the American government's immigration policies. The problem is that both in practice and in substance, they don't have the training or the forensic capability, police officers in one state,
can't answer the question
to deal with people who effectively come into this country and apply for political asylum. They don't have the ability to discern a person who has an application pending. People who apply for relief do not need to have papers. Why do I have to talk over you, sir? I'm happy to debate you, but
you can't debate one part of the law.
If somebody comes into this country
with the actual law.
I'll name you a specific area of law. An area of law, very specifically, a person who comes into this country as a visitor and applies for an extension does not have to walk with their extension. Under the federal law, they are allowed to be here while the application is being adjudicated, and they don't even have a receipt. Now, a police officer in Arizona stops that person, whether they're a businessman, whether they're here as a physician, a technologist, or anything, and the law cannot deport them. And the immigration now will have a visitor visit by an Arizona police officer, and they're going to go nowhere with this. This is a waste of resources.
I want to bring in the entire racial profiling aspect that you discussed before, because that's the thing that most people are so up in arms about over this law. I mean, whether it be legal or not, whatever, the problem here is that it opens the door to racial profiling. And this is something that the Obama administration instantly came out and you know, spoke out against this law for that reason. And then, like you said, when they actually filed the suit, that language is nowhere in there. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if that
I'm not so scared. I don't know if the other attorney...
I don't know if it makes it easier to do it without it, or do they just wimp out on it?
It would be much easier. If they really thought that there was a racial profiling issue here, it would have been an equal protection challenge under the 14th Amendment. At least you would have added that into this.
But isn't that more complicated?
No, actually not. This preemption doctrine is much more complicated because there's nothing on the book that directly conflicts with this law.
I would agree with... If I might agree on this point. I'm not as concerned. Maybe it's because I'm a federal law enforcement, a federal prosecutor, a former federal prosecutor. Maybe I'm not so scared of the racial profiling issue. The problem is that this law is predicated on people who speak differently and look differently. And even if a police officer reasonably stops somebody for a legitimate reason, this is not a country that goes around carding people, asking them, the next slippery slope will be what religion are you.
Let's
make documents where we can track this. This is the wrong direction for one state to take.
And it will hurt the people that actually look different. You may say that the racial profiling part of it doesn't affect you, doesn't scare you, but that's because you aren't going to be racially profiled.
If the Obama administration believed that, and the president's playing race politics here, and if he really believed that, those really smart Department of Justice attorneys would have put that in the lawsuit. They didn't because they know it's not there.
I don't think there's race politics here. I think it's an offensive law on the merits.
It's not offensive. It's the same as federal law. And under Supreme Court precedent, race can be a factor in these decisions. It cannot be the sole factor, but it can be a factor. That's been the law of our land since 1975.
Right, but we're giving the police the authority. Listen, let's all agree on one thing. This is a symptom of the states reacting that the costs of educating and mending people in hospitals is way too expensive for us to shoulder. You have to fix our borders. Everybody in your studio and watching this wants America to have strong borders and to make sure that the people within are either going to be removed if they're criminals or brought into the system in a way that will not invite other illegals to come in the next generation. But every president has had the judgment and the capacity to help let a little air out of the tire and fix this. And I'm not an advocate for clean amnesty, as President Reagan did in 1986. But the bottom line is, the one thing that Arizona law did, it got the juices going. But unfortunately, politically, it's going to be played out in the courts.
All right, we got to start wrapping up because we're out of time. Michael, let's give you one more word, Jordan.
Let me say this very clearly. There's two different issues. Border security and our immigration process is different. It's a political distraction to say that until we handle immigration reform, we can't secure the borders. It's our government acting with its defeatist attitude.
But everyone likes to lump them in, and what happens now
they do,
is now this is going to take a really long time.
And both sides are hiding behind the flag here.
July 22nd.
Both sides are hiding.
That's all the time we have. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much.
CNN poll states that 49% of Americans would now be in support of repealing